This investigation is sponsored by established titles. Lucifer. The name itself is one you're probably familiar with. But how much do you really know about this fallen angel? Lucifer is often portrayed as the embodiment of evil, yet in the Hebrew Bible, he starts out as a beautiful and powerful angel, one of the closest beings to God. Once, Lucifer's beauty and strength were unmatched, and his position among the heavenly host was near the top. But, as the story goes, his pride grew. Lucifer wanted more. He wanted to be like God. He sought to take the throne of heaven, and that desire, that rebellion, led to his downfall. God, in his infinite wisdom, cast Lucifer out of heaven, and with him fell a third of the angels, as described in the book of Revelation. But while this is the most famous account of a fallen angel, it's far from the only one. In fact, there are darker and even more troubling stories in Abrahamic lore. One of the most intriguing tales tells of 200 angels who formed a conspiracy to share forbidden knowledge and take human wives. Their actions resulted in the birth of giant hybrid offspring who engaged in acts of cannibalism, drinking each other's blood. This account, found in ancient texts, is not only shocking, but also had a significant influence on early Judaism and Christianity. However, because of its disturbing content, it was ultimately rejected by the Church, who feared its association with demonology. But before we dive into these dark tales, let's take a moment to talk about something essential in angelology and demonology: titles. In both the celestial and infernal realms, titles hold significant power. Whether it's the Archangel Michael, the Chief Prince of Israel, or the demon Dagon, the Grand Pantler of Satan's royal household, titles denote both status and authority. I've personally come across entire grimoires that detail the who's who of heaven and hell, but none quite compare to having your own title officially recognized. And speaking of titles, today's sponsor, Established Titles, offers just that. Yes, I, Lord Mythos of Scotland, have secured my own title, thanks to the fine folks at Established Titles. I now own 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Scotland, and according to Scottish tradition, landowners are called lords and ladies. So, by their custom, I am now a lord. Sure, my domain is just 1 square foot, but it's a title that grants me some influence, if only over that tiny piece of land. But it doesn't end there. For every order placed through Established Titles, they plant a tree as part of a global reforestation effort. They work with trees for the future, ensuring that every purchase contributes to replanting our forests. It's a great cause that also ties into the title itself, helping the planet while you hold a title. And if you feel like getting in on the action, you can even change your name to Lord or Lady, appearing on your credit cards, plane tickets, and more. And yes, as a perfect gift, how else could you make your loved one feel like royalty than by literally making them a lord or lady? If you decide to purchase a title pack, the first 200 people using my link will receive a special 10% discount. Now, let's return to the dark and twisted lore of fallen angels. The term fallen angel itself doesn't actually appear in the Bible, or in any other Abrahamic scripture for that matter. However, the concept of angels falling is very much present. When an angel falls, it's typically due to sin, an act so grievous that it leads to their banishment from heaven. In the Bible, it's said that all angels were originally created sinless, but they were granted free will. This means that any sin they commit is a conscious choice, an act of rebellion against God's will, which leads to a severe punishment. According to Scripture, there are 3 possible outcomes for fallen angels. Some are temporarily confined in the abyss, a place of deep, dark imprisonment. Others are locked away forever in a torturous realm that the Greeks believed was even worse than Hades itself, and the rest are cast down to earth to continue their rebellion. These fallen angels retain their immortality and spiritual nature, but they have lost their heavenly purity and position, and they can never reclaim it. So, what exactly are fallen angels? Are they demons? Well, that's where things get interesting. In my video last year on demonology, I made a claim that many people disagreed with: the idea that demons are fallen angels. In that video, I was recounting the traditional Christian view, but today we'll be taking a different perspective, looking at the origin of demons, not from the Bible, but from the Book of Enoch, also known as 1 Enoch. Now, many churches today regard 1 Enoch as apocryphal, meaning it's not part of the canonical Bible. However, several denominations, including the Eritrean Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, would argue otherwise. In fact, many early Christian theologians also held 1 Enoch in high regard. It's a fascinating text that was written around 300 BC, but it wasn't until around 380 AD that most churches rejected it as scripture. Interestingly, the New Testament Epistle of Jude, written around 50 AD, actually quotes from 1 Enoch, providing strong evidence that it could have once been considered part of the biblical canon. However, the content of 1 Enoch is incredibly controversial and disturbing. In its pages, we find the tale of 200 angels who descend to earth, sharing forbidden knowledge with humans and engaging in forbidden relationships with human women. This results in the birth of hybrid offspring, creatures of immense size and power, beasts who feast on each other's blood. The legacy of these angels, known as the Watchers, is one of corruption, destruction, and the spread of forbidden knowledge. These ancient writings paint a picture of angels who don't merely fall from grace, but instead conspire, break divine laws, and forever alter the course of humanity. It's a dark, twisted story that's had a profound influence on religious thought, though it has been largely dismissed by mainstream Christianity. But for those willing to dig deeper, 1 Enoch presents an entirely different view of fallen angels, one where their sin isn't just pride, but a deliberate act of rebellion that changes everything. So, where does this leave us? Are demons simply fallen angels, or do they represent something far more sinister? The story of the 200 angels, their fall, and their forbidden union with humanity raises important questions. And perhaps, just perhaps, it's a reminder that the line between the divine and the demonic is not as clear as we may have been led to believe. Remember, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. The more we uncover about these ancient tales, the more we realize how much is hidden from us, locked away in ancient texts and waiting to be discovered. And speaking of discoveries, if you're interested in learning more about these fascinating and sometimes terrifying stories, be sure to subscribe. And don't forget to check out established titles to get your own title, becoming a part of something larger than yourself, just as the angels of old sought to do. Until next time, my friends. In ancient texts, there is a disturbing story that emerges, one that seems to challenge everything we understand about the natural order of creation. It involves the forbidden union of angels and human women, a union that led to catastrophic consequences. This unnatural coupling resulted in God transforming these women into monstrous, bird-like creatures. But before this transformation, they gave birth to a race of beings unlike anything seen before, the Nephilim. These creatures were giants, not just in size, but in violence and hunger. Their appetites were so insatiable that they devoured animals, humans, and even each other. They drank the blood of their victims, an act so horrific in Jewish tradition that it is seen as the ultimate violation of God's beautiful and sacred creations. However, for Christians, there is another aspect of this story that is even more offensive. According to the ancient writings of Enoch, the first sin, the origin of all sin, did not stem from Adam and Eve. Instead, it was the result of the actions of fallen angels, beings who once served God but chose to defy him. Now, you may be wondering, who wrote these controversial texts? The answer brings us to one of the Bible's most enigmatic figures, Enoch. The Bible mentions Enoch only once, saying, "Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away." This passage makes Enoch one of only 3 humans to have entered heaven alive, alongside the prophet Elijah and Jesus Christ, according to Christian tradition. Clearly, Enoch held an extremely important place in the spiritual narrative. Yet, beyond this brief mention, the Bible offers no further details about him. But there is more to the story. The Book of Enoch, an ancient text attributed to him, gives a much deeper insight. According to tradition, Enoch wrote many texts after a visionary journey to heaven. These writings were said to be so significant that they were preserved by his great-grandson Noah, who protected them on the ark during the great flood that reset the world. Strangely, however, this particular text would be lost for nearly 1,000 years. It wasn't until the 9th century AD that 3 copies of the Book of Enoch were rediscovered, all written in an ancient Ethiopian Semitic language. Interestingly, the Ethiopians never lost the Book of Enoch and continued to treat it as an essential part of their biblical canon. These Ethiopian copies are the only complete versions we have found. Later, the discovery of ancient Aramaic fragments confirmed the accuracy of the text, proving that the Book of Enoch is indeed a crucial document in understanding the history of early biblical traditions. Why is the Book of Enoch so important? Because it reveals the story of the Watchers, a group of angels who were sent by God to watch over humanity. These angels were supposed to guide and influence people, especially world leaders, according to God's divine orders. The Bible does mention these watchers in the book of Daniel, but it only gives a brief, vague reference to their role. In fact, in all 3 instances where they appear in Daniel, the prophet specifically calls them holy ones. This subtle reference hints at the existence of another group, unholy watchers, whose actions would lead to unimaginable chaos. The New Testament also provides a clue. In the Epistle of Jude, the writer mentions a certain group of angels who gave themselves over to sexual immorality and went after strange flesh. This directly points to the story of the fallen angels, whose rebellion against God and their forbidden relationships with human women resulted in terrible consequences. In this video, we will dive deep into the mysteries surrounding the Watchers and their sins, exploring not just the Book of Enoch, but also other ancient Enochian texts, such as the Book of Giants and the Book of Jubilees. These works are full of apocalyptic imagery and describe events that were largely rejected by mainstream Christianity as canonical. But it is the Book of Enoch that truly opens the door to understanding the origins of evil in the world. The first section of the Book of Enoch, known as the Book of the Watchers, takes place in a time long before the flood, an era when humanity lived extraordinarily long lives, untouched by the corruption of sin. It was a time of blissful innocence, where humans and angels could interact freely. In this world, it was not unusual for an angel to walk among humans, to watch over them, and guide them in their spiritual growth. But this peaceful existence would soon be disrupted. The Watchers, the angels who were sent to guide humanity, began to fall victim to temptation. Despite their celestial nature, they became attracted to human women. The following verse from chapter 6 of the Book of the Watchers describes how this temptation unfolded. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw them and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. This passage is strikingly similar to a verse in Genesis 6, where it mentions the sons of God taking human wives. The Book of Enoch, along with other ancient texts such as the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Giants, provides a vivid and unforgettable introduction to the rebellion of the angels. In the 69th chapter of Enoch, the angel Yakan is the first of the Watchers to give in to temptation. He approaches the leader of the Watchers, Samyaza, and convinces him to join in this forbidden act. The exact details of how Yakan persuaded Samyaza are not clear, but it wasn't long before many of the Watchers followed suit, leading to an outbreak of sin that would forever change the world. A dark alliance of exactly 200 Watchers gathered at the summit of Mount Hermon. Their leader, Semyaza, led the discussion. I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. The chieftain's fear was misplaced. All 200 of them were equally caught up in temptation. They were bound by their own desires, driven by an overwhelming need to satisfy their carnal lusts and cravings. Together, they swore an oath. They vowed to act on their plan, no matter the consequences. If they were caught, they would face the punishment together. And so, they did it. The Watchers descended from the heavens, each choosing a wife from among the daughters of men. They took these women as their own, and the unholy unions were sealed. The Watchers, now mingling with humanity, impregnated the women, setting in motion the creation of a new and unnatural line of beings. As these pregnancies progressed, the Watchers decided to share their heavenly knowledge with their new wives. This was the introduction of forbidden knowledge into the world. They shared with them the secrets of the astrological signs, the phases of celestial bodies, and the ancient arts of sorcery and magical spells. The Watchers also imparted knowledge of herbalism, metallurgy, and even the hidden truths about humanity's divine origin. Later, God would declare that the knowledge shared by the angel Azazel was the worst of them all. The Book of Enoch tells us that the earth became corrupted through the works taught by Azazel. He revealed to mankind how to craft armor, weapons of war, and even jewelry made from silver, meant to please women. Then Azazel's influence spread further. He taught the women the art of cosmetics, eye paints, makeup, and the use of precious stones. He also introduced clothing dyes. As a result, Azazel was believed to be the root cause of promiscuity and violence on the earth. But this forbidden knowledge did not stop with the women. It would also be passed on to the Watchers' offspring, the children born of these unholy unions. These children were not fully human. They were the product of a demonic, unnatural marriage between spiritual beings and mortal women. These beings were known as the Nephilim. In the literature of Enoch, the Nephilim are described as the true origin of evil spirits, what we know today as demons. The Nephilim, in their earthly existence, were monstrous giants, beings of flesh and blood. They were creatures of immense size, born from the fall of the Watchers. Their souls, however, would face a much darker fate after death, as they would become the wandering evil spirits we now call demons. The book of Genesis briefly mentions the existence of the Nephilim. In Genesis 6:4, it is written, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them." This is the first and only clear reference to these beings in the Bible. The book of Numbers provides further insight, revealing that the Nephilim were of gigantic stature. When a group of spies was sent to survey the promised land of Canaan, they reported, "There we saw the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." According to the Book of the Watchers, the Nephilim were described as towering 300 cubits tall, approximately 450 feet. It's unlikely they were born at such an immense size, but it is clear they grew rapidly. Their size, however, became a significant problem. The 450-foot giants required vast amounts of food, and the human population could no longer sustain them. Desperate, the Nephilim turned on humanity. They began to consume not only human food, but the very flesh and blood of mankind. As their hunger grew, they resorted to devouring each other. The giants turned against the seabirds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, committing horrific acts of cannibalism and bloodshed. The chaos they unleashed upon the world was unlike anything ever seen before. The conspiracy of the 200 Watchers could no longer remain hidden. From their vantage point in heaven, the archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel watched in horror as the earth descended into violence and depravity. They immediately approached God's throne and reported the state of the world. The archangels begged God for divine intervention. In response, God, who already knew the extent of the corruption, decreed the punishments for the Watchers. He instructed the archangels to bind Semyaza and his associates, who had defiled themselves with women. He commanded, "Bind them until the day of their judgment. Let them be cast into the abyss of fire, where they will be tormented and imprisoned forever. Bind Azazel, hand and foot. Cast him into the desert, and place upon him jagged rocks. Cover him with darkness, so that he may not see light again." The archangels, having received God's decree, carried out the punishments. The Watchers were bound, and the Nephilim were condemned to an endless cycle of civil war. God's plan was for the Nephilim to witness their own downfall, to suffer and be the cause of the destruction of their own race. But even death would not be the final rest for the Nephilim. God placed a curse on their spirits, declaring, "Now the giants, produced from the spirits of angels and men, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth. Their spirits shall walk the earth, and they shall be evil spirits, for they are born from both humans and holy Watchers. They shall be called evil spirits, and upon the earth shall be their dwelling place." God further explained that their disembodied spirits would never find peace. Their souls would wander the earth, doomed to eternal suffering and torment. Their reign of terror was over, but their spirits would continue to haunt the earth forever, spreading corruption and evil wherever they went. Thus, the Watchers' rebellion marked the beginning of a tragic legacy, one that would plague humanity for generations. The Nephilim, once giants of the earth, would now become the demons of the unseen world. And so, the cycle of darkness continued, as the fallen angels and their monstrous offspring left their indelible mark on the world. Endless hunger and thirst will torment and enrage these beings, directing their fury toward humanity. The Nephilim will be the very origin of demons on earth. But there is much more to this story. and I've set aside an entire section in this video to delve into these beings further. As for the women who gave birth to the Nephilim, a later chapter in the Book of the Watchers reveals their punishment. The women of the angels who went astray shall become sirens. Now, what exactly are these sirens? According to ancient texts, they are hybrid creatures, half bird, half woman. We will explore them further shortly, particularly their connection to Lilith, the famous demon from Jewish folklore. God's final punishment, however, was something that would affect everyone on earth, including the innocent. To God, the fallen watchers and the Nephilim had corrupted the world so completely that the only solution was a complete reset. This reset would come in the form of a great flood, a deluge that would cleanse the earth of all impurities, all wrongs, all lawlessness, sin, and godlessness. Everything in existence would be destroyed, and mankind could only begin anew after the earth was wiped clean. In this moment of divine judgment, God commanded the archangel Uriel to descend from heaven and warn the one man deemed worthy of survival, Enoch's great-grandson, Noah. Noah was instructed to build an ark, for the flood would arrive after a set number of years. The clock was now ticking. Meanwhile, God commanded Enoch himself to approach the watchers and inform them of their inevitable punishment. Enoch first approached Azazel. Then he delivered the message to the remaining 199 watchers. As he spoke, they were all afraid. Fear and trembling seized them. They begged Enoch to present a petition on their behalf, hoping to find forgiveness from God. They sought a way to plead for mercy, but their fate had already been sealed. God had cut off all communication with the fallen angels, and no amount of pleading could change their fate. Their punishment would be severe and eternal. They would never be forgiven for their sins. This shows how serious their fall was in the eyes of God, a judgment that could not be reversed. Now, as promised, let's return to the women who had sinned with the Watchers, giving birth to the Nephilim and being transformed into grotesque creatures known as sirens. What exactly are these sirens? The term sirens appears multiple times in the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament. While the descriptions are not entirely clear, scholars speculate that these creatures could be a hybrid of female owl, ostrich, or even human. The common thread in all these interpretations is that these are female beings who wail and cry out. In Greek mythology, the concept of sirens is much more well known. These were indeed hybrid monsters, half woman, half bird, who resided on islands in the ocean. With their beautiful hypnotic voices, they would lure sailors to their doom, causing their ships to crash on the jagged coastlines. In this sense, sirens can be viewed as a type of demon. Interestingly, in one of the most important works of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar, this belief is also reflected. Now, here's a curious thing about the Zohar. Despite its detailed knowledge of the first book of Enoch, a text thought to be lost until much later, the Zohar was written in the 13th century, long after Enoch's work was believed to have disappeared. This presents an intriguing mystery. Going back to the sirens, the Zohar presents an unusual perspective. It suggests that the women, not the Watchers, were the ones who seduced the angels. The first woman to do this was named Namara, or Namara, the mother of the demons. She is described as having seduced the sons of God, Samyaza and Azazel, through her beauty. It was from her that evil spirits and demons first entered the world. According to the Zohar, Namara was transformed into a siren, much like the ones described in Greek mythology. This curse also befell the other women who sinned with her. Namara became the mother of demons. tasked with creating a multi-generational chain of corrupted births. Her job was to give birth to the darkest spirits, who would continue to spread evil in the world. Namara's transformation is chilling. The Zohar describes her as dwelling among the waves of the great sea. She goes forth, preying on men through their lustful dreams. From these dreams, she becomes pregnant, and the children she bears are spirits, evil, dark spirits that will go on to haunt mankind. The Zohar further reveals that these spirits find their way to Lilith, the most notorious of demonic figures, who raises them in her own twisted manner. Some of you may be familiar with Lilith. Although she is not specifically mentioned in the Book of Enoch, Lilith plays a prominent role in Jewish folklore. In certain traditions, Lilith is considered to be a singular, powerful demoness, while in others, the name refers to an entire class of female demons. Interestingly, the Hebrew Bible mentions a Lilith only once in the book of Isaiah. The passage reads, "There shall the Lilith repose and find for herself a place to rest." The nature of this being, as well as her connection to the fallen angels and the Nephilim, is still debated among scholars. Some believe this passage hints at the existence of a monstrous entity, a representation of chaos and evil that would plague the world with her demonic influence. The hoot owl shall nest, lay her eggs, hatch them, and gather them in her shadow. This passage speaks of a deep connection between Lilith and the siren, two female entities often associated with evil and birds. The term Lilith is believed to have roots in an ancient Hebrew word for a night bird. But to fully understand her story, we must first explore her origins within Jewish tradition. Lilith was not just any woman. She was the first wife of Adam, long before Eve. In the book of Genesis, it is stated that Eve was created from Adam's rib, essentially a derivative of God's original creation. But Lilith, according to Jewish folklore, was formed from the same clay as Adam and created at the same time. Yet, there was a significant difference. Unlike Eve, Lilith was not willing to submit to Adam. She was fiercely independent, and this rebellious spirit led her to leave the Garden of Eden. But her story doesn't end there. After departing Eden, Lilith formed a union with the archangel Samael. She seduced him, became his wife, and together they gave birth to demonic offspring, including a son named Asmodeus. Lilith and Samael's dark relationship can be seen as the demonic counterpart to the relationship between Adam and Eve. In this regard, Samael is often seen as the first fallen angel, parallel to Satan in Christian theology. While this tale comes from folklore and not scripture, it adds layers of intrigue and complexity to Lilith's narrative. Some versions of the story even claim that God took drastic measures to stop Samael and Lilith from producing more demonic children. One account suggests that God castrated Samael in an attempt to halt their unholy union. Despite this, Lilith sought intercourse with other men, even as she continued to remain bonded to Samael. The tale continues in the Zohar, a key text in Kabbalistic tradition, which intertwines Lilith's fate with the events that transpired after Adam and Eve's expulsion from Eden. Following their fall from grace, Adam and Eve were separated for 130 years. During this time, Lilith returned to Adam, and they had children together. 2 daughters were born from this union, one of whom was named Nama. Nama would later become notorious in her own right, as she is said to be the first woman to seduce the Watchers, fallen angels who took human wives. From these unions came more demons, marking the continuation of a lineage of darkness that began with Lilith herself. Now, let's fast forward to 1947, a year before a devastating conflict erupted in the Middle East. An Arab shepherd, in search of a lost goat, stumbled upon the entrance to a dark cave. Thinking his goat had wandered inside, he threw a stone into the cave to scare it out. To his surprise, the sound of shattering pottery echoed back. Curious, he returned with friends, and together they discovered an array of slender ceramic vases, each filled with ancient scrolls. Initially, the scrolls were thought to be worthless forgeries, likely stolen. But one tribal leader referred them to a shoemaker and part-time antique dealer, who purchased them for around $340 in modern US dollars. Little did he know, these scrolls were among the most significant archaeological finds of the century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was nothing short of miraculous. The scrolls were believed to be over 2,200 years old, surviving in the harsh environment of the Judean desert. The oldest known Hebrew Bible at that time dated back to the late 9th century AD. But the Dead Sea Scrolls contained texts that were written as early as the 3rd century BC. These ancient manuscripts offered a glimpse into the past and have since become one of the most important archaeological finds in history. But the true significance of these scrolls was far beyond their age. While they contained versions of the Hebrew Bible, the scrolls also revealed apocalyptic writings that had once been influential but were later suppressed by religious authorities. These texts had been hidden in the cave, perhaps to ensure their survival. Among these texts were the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Giants. The Book of Enoch holds the key to many mysteries within the Book of Genesis. The books of Jubilees and Giants delve deeper into questions raised by Enoch, particularly concerning the Nephilim, giant cannibalistic offspring of the Watchers, and the flood sent by God to purge the earth of these monstrous beings. In Enochian literature, it is strongly suggested that the violent actions of the Nephilim justified the Great Flood. The Book of the Watchers describes these giants as consuming humans, animals, and even each other, drinking blood, the epitome of sin. But the question remains, were the Nephilim inherently evil, monstrous beings, or were their violent acts a result of their unnatural circumstances? God only described their spirits as evil after placing a curse upon them, not before. Unfortunately, the Book of Enoch provides little detail about the actions of the Nephilim as individuals, leaving a significant gap in their story. The Book of Giants, as its title suggests, offers a far more detailed account of the Nephilim. It portrays them as thinking, feeling creatures, imperfect beings driven by circumstances beyond their control. Much like humans, some Nephilim were indeed evil by nature, but others were simply victims of their situation. This book offers a surprisingly action-packed narrative about the Nephilim and their interactions with the Watchers before the flood. However, there is a peculiar issue with the Book of Giants. Like many Enochian texts, it exists in multiple versions with varying degrees of difference. The two main versions of the Book of Giants are an extremely fragmented Aramaic copy found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and a more complete, though still fragmented, Manichaean version discovered in China. Both versions are ancient, but the Aramaic version is considered the oldest and closest to the original. Unfortunately, it is nearly impossible to read in its entirety. On the other hand, the Manichaean version, although more complete, is based on the Aramaic text, but contains certain differences in detail. The Book of Giants, a strange retelling of ancient prophecy. Manichaeism, once a major world religion, was founded by the prophet Mani in the 3rd century AD. This fascinating belief system uniquely blended elements of Judaism, Gnosticism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and even Buddhism. It adopted numerous religious writings from these traditions, one of which was the Book of Giants. But the Book of Giants is not just any ancient text. It was one of the original 6 scriptures of the Manichaean Church, and its adaptation was written by none other than the prophet Mani himself. For the purposes of this exploration, we'll focus primarily on the Aramaic version of this book, but we'll also reference the Manichaean adaptation, where it diverges in startling ways, especially at the very beginning and again at the very end. The Book of Giants begins similarly to other Enochian literature. It retells the well-known story of the Watchers, fallen angels who lusted after human women, resulting in the birth of their gigantic offspring, the Nephilim. Both the Aramaic and Manichaean versions follow this narrative, but the key difference lies in the Manichaean version's premise. Influenced heavily by Gnosticism, Prophet Mani did not see the Watchers as angels at all. Instead, he portrayed them as archons, cosmic demons who had once been imprisoned in the skies. In Mani's reinterpretation, these beings were not inherently good, as the traditional Judeo-Christian narrative suggests. According to the Gnostic belief that influenced him, no evil could come from a good origin. Therefore, Mani transformed the Watchers into rebellious demons. As noted by Manichaean scholar Walter Bruno Henning, the heavenly origin of the fallen Watchers did not square with Mani's conviction that no evil could come from good. Therefore, he transformed them into demons, those demons who, when the world was being constructed, had been imprisoned in the skies under the supervision of Rex Oneros, the second son of the Manichaean god, Mithra. They rebelled, were recaptured, but 200 of them escaped to Earth. These escaping demons did not just seek refuge on Earth. Their powers gave them the ability to spy from afar, and they saw the beauty of the human women. In the Manichaean version, these Watchers did not simply fall prey to lust. Their desire to conquer humanity is portrayed as part of a much darker, alien-like invasion. These cosmic beings descend to Earth, not only hiding, but actively enslaving and subjugating the human race. While this interpretation of the Watchers is chilling and distinctly more alien, it's a relatively short part of the Book of Giants, and the rest of the story aligns closely with the Aramaic version. However, what happens next takes a surprising turn. God's mercy towards the Nephilim. In the Book of Enoch, the Lord shows no mercy to the Nephilim. They are thrown into a never-ending civil war, condemned to drown in the Great Flood, and cursed with eternal damnation. This seems like a rather harsh and extreme fate for these beings. The Book of Giants, however, presents a more compassionate side of God. Rather than simply condemning them, the merciful Lord sends prophetic warnings to the Nephilim and gives them a chance to repent. These warnings come in the form of dreams. 2. Nephilim, one named Oya, son of the chief watcher, Samyaza, and the other named Mahue, experience these vivid, powerful dreams. They feel compelled to share their visions with the Watchers and the other Nephilim. Mahue's dream is particularly striking. He dreams of a stone tablet covered in many names. As the tablet is submerged into water, all the names are washed away, except for 3. To the reader, it's clear that this is a prophetic vision of the Great Flood, the deluge to come. The 3 remaining names represent Noah and his family, the only ones who would survive. Though the Nephilim and the Watchers interpret the dream as a sign of impending judgment, they fail to understand its true meaning. They see it as an unavoidable disaster that will annihilate all except a few. Oya's dream is similar. She dreams of a large tree being pulled from the ground. The tree is uprooted, but it is stopped from being completely torn away by 3 roots that cling to the earth. The Nephilim and Watchers again interpret this as a sign of divine punishment. They understand that only a few will survive, but they are powerless to prevent the coming judgment. Oya, in a panic, insists, "It is not for us, but for Azazel, for he did it." As the days pass, more ominous dreams follow, each one darker and more unsettling than the last. The Watchers and the Nephilim become plagued with anxiety. In desperation, someone suggests they turn to Enoch for guidance. Mahue agrees to undertake a cosmic journey to visit Enoch, the patriarch, and seek his interpretation of the dreams. Enoch receives Mahue's request and journeys to the heavens to consult God. When he returns, he brings with him 2 massive tablets, gifts from God, containing his message. The message is overwhelmingly grim, yet it contains a faint, yet crucial invitation that could alter the Nephilim's fate. Enoch speaks, "Let it be known to you that the land is crying out and complaining about you, and the deeds of your children, the harm that you have done to it. Until the archangel Raphael arrives, behold, destruction is coming, a great flood that will destroy all living things. Whatever is in the deserts and the seas will be wiped out. But now, loosen the bones binding you to evil, and pray." This is where the Aramaic fragments end. But it's not the true end of the story. The conclusion is missing, and, as of now, a complete Aramaic copy of the Book of Giants has never been discovered. That said, the Manichaean version has its own, remarkably climactic ending. Let's rewind a bit to the events that occur before the final resolution. Mahue was sent to visit Enoch. In this version, Enoch actually visits her community himself, accompanied by a handful of heavenly helpers. Unlike the Aramaic version, where the Watchers are morally complex beings who engage in a conspiracy many would later regret, this adaptation reinterprets the Watchers as wicked, cosmic demons, beings of pure evil through and through. In this narrative, Enoch descends to ease the worries of the Nephilim. The Nephilim are not purely evil beings, unlike their fathers. Their fathers, the 200 demonic archons, realize they outnumber Enoch's heavenly guard. This sets the stage for a brutal confrontation. As the demons launch an attack, they capture the lesser angels, taking them hostage. This triggers an immediate emergency response from heaven. The clouds open, and 4 archangels descend like rockets to stop them. When the 200 demons saw those angels, they were very much afraid and worried. They assumed the shape of men and hid themselves. The archangels, undeterred, forcibly remove the men from the demons, lay them aside, and put a guard over them. The archangels arrived swiftly and gathered the innocent Nephilim, who were not involved in the hostage situation. These giants were taken from the ground and flown to safety, scattered across 32 distant towns in the mountains. Homestead said, God, in his omniscience, had prepared for them long ago. Once the Nephilim were safely scattered, the archangels returned, and soon after, a massive fiery battle broke out between them and the Watchers. The turning point in the battle came when the angels used a powerful heavenly weapon, fire, naphtha, and brimstone, the great fire of ruin, a fire that set the world ablaze. The angels, with brilliant wings, flew outside and above the flames, gazing into the fire's depths and height, at the souls that might try to escape. This fire, described in such vivid detail, has led some to speculate that it might resemble an ancient nuclear weapon, a weapon of mass destruction, capable of wiping out entire civilizations. Regardless of its true nature, this was the final blow that led to heaven's victory. The 4 archangels proceeded to bind the Watchers with everlasting chains and cast them into a pitch-black, subterranean prison deep under the mountains. Finally, they annihilated the Nephilim children, who were complicit in the plot. It is a dark end to the story, but there is hope. It suggests that a number of innocent Nephilim were saved, those who chose to heed God's advice, to pray, and to repent for their sins. But what about the flood that was to come? Thankfully, we haven't reached the bottom of this rabbit hole just yet. To understand the next steps, we turn our attention to the next Enochian text on our list, the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees, like the first book of Enoch, was once highly regarded and influential in both Jewish and early Christian communities. Like its counterpart, it was eventually rejected as canonical scripture, except in Ethiopia, where it was translated into Ge'ez and maintained as genuine biblical scripture. The original keepers of the Dead Sea Scrolls valued the Book of Jubilees so much that they stored no less than 15 complete copies of it. This is more copies than any other text in the Hebrew Bible, and far more than they kept of both the first book of Enoch and the Book of Giants. This shows just how highly the ancient community valued this text. Generally speaking, Enochian texts, such as the Book of Jubilees, aim to provide answers to mysteries that are left unexplained in the biblical book of Genesis. One of the biggest mysteries is what exactly justified the flood. Why was such an indiscriminate world-wiping event necessary? While Genesis simply blames corruption and violence, the first book of Enoch provides us with detailed insights. The Book of Giants delves into the action, and the Book of Jubilees summarizes it succinctly. Due to these three things, the flood came upon the earth. The fornication, wherein the watchers went, a whoring after the daughters of men. They made the beginning of uncleanness, and they begat sons, the Nephilim, who devoured one another. After this, they sinned against the beasts and birds, and all that moves and walks on the earth. The Book of Jubilees goes much further than any other Enochian text in two key areas: the Great Flood and the demons that emerged from it. It provides a strikingly poetic description of the cataclysmic moment when the floodwaters arrived. The Lord opened 7 floodgates of heaven, and the mouths of the fountains of the great deep, 7 mouths in number. And the floodgates began to pour down water from heaven for 40 days and 40 nights. And the fountains of the deep also sent up waters, until the whole world was full of water. And the Lord destroyed everything from the face of the earth. He destroyed everything. As we know, the flood is deeply intertwined with the release of the first demons, the Nephilim. Those Nephilim who drowned would die, and from their bodies, their cursed spirits would be torn out. Instead of ascending to heaven, these spirits were damned to walk the earth, to afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction. As described in the Book of the Watchers, the spirits of the giants take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. This speaks to the insatiable torment that drives the demons. Their suffering mirrors the brutal violence they inflicted during their lifetimes as Nephilim. It's a terrible fate. In the Book of Jubilees, we learn that after the Great Flood, it wasn't long before the first true demons began to cause trouble for humanity. After Noah's Ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, Noah and his 3 sons divided the earth. Each son claimed a portion of the land, and as time passed, their descendants spread out further. It was precisely at this moment, when the earth was being repopulated, that demons first emerged. Their mission? To lead this new generation away from righteousness, toward corruption, and ultimately, death. The first few casualties were devastating, and soon, Noah's sons reported the troubling news to their father. In response, Noah made a desperate plea to God, asking for his mercy. "Let your free and unmerited pardon be lifted up upon my sons, and let not wicked spirits rule over them. Imprison the demons and hold them fast in the place of condemnation. Let them not bring destruction upon the sons of your servant, for these spirits are malignant and were created to destroy." Book of Jubilees 45:47. Surprisingly, God granted Noah's request in full. He commanded that all the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim be bound, and that they be kept in a place of condemnation, away from humanity. However, trouble was still lurking on the horizon. These evil spirits had a leader, a powerful and shadowy entity known as Mastema, often referred to as the Prince of Hostility. Before the demons could be cast away into the abyss, Mastema quickly approached God with a plea of his own. In a voice full of cunning, he asked, "Creator, let some of them remain before me. Let them listen to my voice and do all that I shall say unto them. For if some of them are not left to me, I shall not be able to carry out my will on the sons of men. I will corrupt them, leading them astray before your judgment. For great is the wickedness of the sons of men." Book of Jubilees 46:28. God, after some deliberation, agreed to Mastema's request. He allowed 1/10 of the demons to remain on earth under his control, while the remaining 9/10 were cast into the place of condemnation. This decision drastically reduced the overwhelming demonic population. In fact, just a few verses later, it is made clear who Mastema truly is: the devil, also known as Satan. While God's decision to allow Satan and his forces to remain on earth may seem strange, this was a win-win situation, not for Noah, but for Satan. The presence of demons is not without purpose. In fact, they play a crucial role in God's divine plan. Why are demons so important? The answer lies in their intended purpose: to make our lives miserable. Let me explain. The infamous passage from the Book of the Watchers makes it crystal clear that it is, in fact, God's will for demons to torment humanity. "The spirits of the giants shall rise up against humankind, for they have proceeded from them. These spirits shall destroy without incurring judgment, and they will desolate the earth until the day of the great judgment." Book of the Watchers 48:24. Now, you may be wondering, why would God want demons to torment us? Why would he allow them to do so without consequences? These are indeed profound theological questions. Many people find their answers in the biblical book of Job, which tells the disturbing tale of a bet made between God and Satan. In this story, God boasts to Satan about a righteous man named Job, someone who has remained steadfast in his faith despite every temptation. Satan, however, is unconvinced. He asks a daring question: "Does Job fear God for no reason? You have blessed him, and all that he has prospered. But if you stretch out your hand and take away everything he possesses, he will surely curse you to your face." Job 1:9-11. God, allowing Satan to test Job, responds, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand." Job 1:12. What follows is a series of unimaginable trials. Satan strips Job of his wealth, kills his livestock, slays his servants, and even takes the lives of his children. Job is covered in painful boils, and his friends accuse him of sin, suggesting that he must have brought this suffering upon himself. For 2 long years, Job endures misery without end. Every waking moment is filled with anguish, and he curses the day of his birth. He even contemplates suing God in a court of law for the injustice he's suffered. But despite everything, Job does not curse God. Instead, in the end, Job's faith endures. Though he grows bitter and exhausted, he still clings to his reverence for God. Finally, God intervenes, commanding Job to stop questioning his ways and to be brave. God then restores Job's health and blesses him with twice as much wealth as he had before. Job's family grows, and he sees many more years of peace and prosperity. The lesson from Job's story. The reason behind all of this suffering is profound. It is a test of faith, one that will continue until the final judgment day. God allows Satan and his demons to torment humanity as a way to test our loyalty, our perseverance, and our trust in him. While it may seem cruel, it is ultimately for the purpose of refining our hearts, teaching us to seek God even in the most difficult of circumstances. And what of the Nephilim, the giants who were once men? Their fate was sealed in the flood. The flood wiped out all life on earth, except for those aboard Noah's Ark. However, the spirits of the Nephilim did not die with the flood. Instead, they became demons. And so, these cursed giants, once the mighty offspring of fallen angels, became the very entities that torment humanity to this day. The final word on demons. Despite what we might think, demons are not just an unfortunate side effect of sin. They have a specific ordained role in God's plan. Their task is to test our faith, to bring us to a place where we must choose. Will we rely on God in the midst of suffering, or will we turn away from him? In this sense, their torment has a higher purpose. But there is hope. For as the book of Job shows us, though we may endure hardship, God will always be there in the end. He will restore us, and he will judge the wicked. The day will come when demons, led by Satan, will face their ultimate defeat. Until then, our challenge is to remain faithful, even in the face of unimaginable trials. Certain verses in the Hebrew Bible open up a significant and perplexing mystery. This mystery seems to begin in the book of Genesis, which says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward." Genesis 6:4. Many scholars interpret this passage as referring to Nephilim survivors, who somehow lived after the Great Flood. But as we dive deeper into the Bible, it becomes evident that the Nephilim are mentioned more than once, and not just in Genesis. In fact, there are more canonical references to these mysterious beings, which adds to the enigma surrounding them. For example, in the book of Numbers, several Israelite spies were sent to survey the land of Canaan. They reported seeing an entire population of Nephilim who had settled there. Not only did these spies explicitly call them Nephilim, but they also described themselves as feeling like tiny grasshoppers when compared to the giants they encountered. According to most biblical scholars, this event would have taken place roughly 400 to 500 years after the flood. And yet, these Nephilim weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The spies reported that the Nephilim lived in large fortified cities and were skilled in advanced agriculture. Their land was abundant with massive fruits, so huge that it would require 2 normal-sized men to carry a single bunch of their grapes. Interestingly, while the Bible mentions other giants who lived after the flood, the Nephilim of Canaan are the only ones specifically called Nephilim. This is crucial because it allows us to speculate further on their origins and existence. The big question arises: how did the Nephilim survive the flood? Jewish folklore offers a variety of theories about this. Some believe that a few Nephilim managed to survive by clinging to the sides of Noah's Ark. Others speculate that the wife of Ham, one of Noah's sons, was herself a Nephilim, and that she survived the flood by being on the ark with Noah's family. However, this theory is likely a later insult aimed at Ham's wife. especially since Ham himself has a negative reputation in the Bible due to his actions after the flood. This theory also lacks strong scriptural support, which makes it a more dubious claim. Moving to Islamic legend, we find another explanation. A race of giants known as the Ad is said to have survived the flood simply because they were too tall to drown. These giants were estimated to be around 100 feet tall, towering above the floodwaters. While this seems fantastical, the Nephilim in the Book of Enoch were described as being even taller, sometimes said to be as much as 450 feet. In the Book of Genesis, it is stated that the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. This means the floodwaters were about 22 feet above the highest mountain peaks. But there's an intriguing detail in the Book of Giants, which tells us that the Nephilim were relocated to 32 distant towns in the mountains. The Nephilim, according to this source, were placed in a special location, one that God himself specifically prepared for them. Perhaps this was God's way of ensuring their survival, despite the deluge that wiped out the rest of humanity. Another theory suggests that after the flood, the Watchers, the angels who once descended to earth and mated with human women, continued their illicit relationships with human women, thus producing a new generation of Nephilim. While the original 200 Watchers were imprisoned for eternity, some speculate that a new group of fallen angels repeated the same sin, resulting in the birth of a new generation of giants. This, however, is a theory based more on extra-biblical sources, such as the Book of Enoch, than on the canonical Bible itself. No matter which of these theories is correct, one thing is undeniable: the Nephilim were cursed. Even those who survived the flood were destined to die. Their children and their children's children were also bound to meet the same fate. This makes them, in a sense, the production line of demons, a never-ending cycle of cursed beings. Perhaps the ancient humans realized this curse and took measures to drive the Nephilim to extinction. This might explain why there is no solid evidence of giants walking the earth today. However, some conspiracy theorists argue otherwise, claiming that a small percentage of the Nephilim may still be alive. According to Enochian lore, the spirits of the dead Nephilim didn't disappear entirely. Instead, they became disembodied evil spirits, controlled by Mastema, a name for Satan in some ancient texts. These spirits, believed to be the offspring of these fallen giants, continue to exist as malicious entities. This gives rise to an interesting notion. While the Nephilim may have disappeared physically from the earth, their evil influence continues, especially through these disembodied spirits. Now, this brings us to another mystery: the figure of Satan himself. Who exactly is Satan, and what is his connection to the Nephilim? One of the most intriguing debates revolves around whether Satan is the same being as Lucifer, the first fallen angel. To answer this, we must dig deeper into ancient texts. The book of Isaiah, 14:12, contains a reference to the morning star, or son of the morning, a phrase that refers to the planet Venus in its brightest state. Later, Latin translations of the Bible replaced the term morning star with Lucifer, which means light bringer, or the one who brings light. This title is symbolic of Lucifer's original role as one of the most exalted and brilliant of all angels. In fact, the Bible describes Lucifer as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Ezekiel 28:12. It goes on to say that Lucifer was adorned with precious stones, and he was the anointed cherub, placed in a position of great honor by God himself. These gifts of strength, beauty, wisdom, and position were all bestowed upon Lucifer by God, making his eventual rebellion all the more tragic. Lucifer's pride ultimately led him to fall. His beauty, wisdom, and position made him forget his Creator and led him to attempt to overthrow God. This prideful rebellion resulted in his expulsion from heaven, and Lucifer became known as Satan, the adversary. Lucifer, in his own mind, was convinced of his greatness. This belief ignited a powerful fire within him, one that transformed into pride. Over time, this pride morphed into something darker: jealousy. Lucifer became envious of the one being that outshined him, God. He began to plot, saying to himself, "I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." This deep-seated desire, his hunger for supremacy, was the catalyst that led to his eventual fall from heaven. It was not a gentle fall. Rather, in the words of Jesus Christ, Lucifer was cast down swiftly, like lightning. In a single decisive moment, God's hand pushed Lucifer from his lofty position, and he was hurled down to earth. For Christians, this event marked the transformation of Lucifer from a powerful angel to Satan, the adversary. It is in this moment that many believe Satan was fallen, a being cast from grace, destined to become the embodiment of evil. Yet, there is a puzzle that many believers grapple with. The Bible does not explicitly state that Lucifer and Satan are the same being. This has caused some confusion throughout Christian history. For instance, in 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul writes, "Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." This verse suggests that Satan might not be an angel at all, but someone who disguises himself as one in order to deceive others. Could it be that Satan is not the fallen angel Lucifer, but rather a completely separate being? This question has led to much debate. Yet, despite these ambiguities, most Christian traditions, based on the weight of evidence throughout the Bible, believe that Lucifer and Satan are one and the same. Numerous scriptures point to this connection. For example, in the book of Job, Satan is depicted as appearing in heaven alongside other sons of God, a biblical term for angels. In both the Gospel of Matthew and the book of Revelation, Satan is described as the leader of fallen angels, an entire host of beings who were cast out of heaven alongside him. Revelation is particularly significant here. It is in Revelation that Christians directly link Lucifer to Satan. In the poetic, yet powerful words of Revelation, we read, "War broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But they were not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven." The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. This passage is seen by most as a clear parallel to the Old Testament accounts of Lucifer's fall, strengthening the connection between Lucifer and Satan. But there remains a question that many Christians ask. When did this event take place? Was it a one-time event, the original fall of Satan from heaven? Or is it a future event, yet to come, in the final days before the day of judgment? Thankfully, the answer is relatively clear. Both Christian tradition and the majority of biblical scholars treat the book of Revelation as a prophecy of things to come. The context of this passage strongly suggests that the event described, the fall of Satan, occurs during the final days. In this sense, Satan fell twice, once in the distant past and once more in the future, during the day of judgment. While Revelation predominantly deals with future events, It also provides glimpses into the past, particularly in the case of Satan's initial fall. In fact, Revelation adds another important detail to the story. The verse continues, "Another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth." Most scholars interpret this as a metaphorical description of Lucifer's fall. The third of the stars that are cast down with the dragon are generally understood to represent the angels who followed Lucifer in his rebellion. When Lucifer was cast out of heaven, he did not fall alone. A third of the heavenly hosts, the angels, chose to follow him, either out of loyalty or because of their own pride. This was the first mass rebellion in heaven, the first fall of angels, well before the rebellion of the Watchers, the 200 angels mentioned in the book of Enoch. This verse in Revelation, combined with the accounts in Ezekiel and Isaiah, gives us the biblical foundation for understanding Lucifer's fall. These are the only canonical scriptures that describe the event in detail. However, many people look to apocryphal or non-canonical books to fill in the gaps left by the Bible. Interestingly, the books of Enoch, the Giants, and Jubilees never mention Lucifer's fall from heaven. The vast majority of apocryphal writings do not delve into this particular narrative. While a few sources provide alternative versions of the story, the details vary significantly. Some offer a more complex narrative, while others focus on different aspects of Lucifer's rebellion. For those who follow the Quran, the story of Lucifer's fall takes on a different form. In Islamic tradition, Lucifer, Iblis, is cast out of heaven, not because of jealousy toward God's throne, but because he refuses to bow to Adam, whom God created as his vicegerent on earth. This refusal to submit to God's will results in his downfall. For those of us who are Christian, the question remains, was Lucifer's fall an isolated event, or does it represent a broader cosmic battle between good and evil that continues to unfold? How do we understand this event in light of our own struggles with pride, jealousy, and temptation? Perhaps these questions will never have definitive answers, but they invite us to explore deeper truths about our own spiritual journeys, about the nature of evil, and about the ultimate victory of good over darkness. The story of Iblis in Islam is one that deeply resonates with the parallel narrative found in Jewish tradition. This tale is not only significant in Islam, but also draws from older Jewish sources, the most notable of which is the Life of Adam and Eve, an ancient Jewish apocryphal text. Scholars generally agree that this work dates back to the 1st century AD. While this background is important, for now, let's focus on the Islamic version, which delves into the details more thoroughly. Don't worry, I will highlight the exact points where the parallel with the Jewish story appears. In Islamic tradition, the name for the devil is Iblis. Much like Satan in Christian theology, Iblis is considered the adversary of Allah, the Arabic name for God. Iblis holds the title of ruler over hell, commanding legions of demons. His ultimate mission is to lead mankind astray, guiding them down a path of sin and away from righteousness. In Islam, there are 2 main interpretations about the nature of Iblis, which come from the Quran, as well as ancient traditions and statements from the companions of Prophet Muhammad. One interpretation is that Iblis was originally a jinn, a powerful spiritual entity that is typically seen as demonic. However, it's important to note that jinn in Islamic belief are morally ambiguous beings who, like humans, possess free will. They can choose good or evil, just as humans do. Today, we will focus on the other interpretation, which holds that Iblis was once the highest-ranking archangel, the closest to the throne of Allah. According to Islamic legend, when Allah created the first man, Adam, from clay, He left Adam to dry for 40 days. During this period, all the angels came to observe Allah's new creation. Iblis was among them. When he saw the clay body of Adam, he scowled in disdain. In one version of the story, Iblis even kicked the clay body of Adam so hard that it reverberated with a sound. Whether you view this story as literal truth or symbolic lore is entirely up to you, but the narrative in the Quran picks up from here, and the events that unfold are nearly identical to the Jewish version found in the life of Adam and Eve. At this point in the story, the creation of man was complete. Allah breathed life into Adam, and then He turned to the angels and commanded them to bow before Adam. In Islam, this act of bowing symbolizes mankind's supreme creation. Humans are the pinnacle of Allah's creation, and they are the only beings who should receive bowing or reverence. In contrast, both jinn and angels are beneath humans in this hierarchy. Allah commanded the angels to bow to Adam as a sign of submission to human superiority. The Jewish interpretation of this event differs slightly. In Jewish tradition, mankind is created in God's image, and therefore, God asks the angels to bow to Adam, not as a sign of Adam's inherent greatness, but as a form of worship toward the image of God. Despite this difference, the outcomes in both the Islamic and Jewish versions are remarkably similar. In both traditions, all of the angels bowed to Adam, except for one. In the Quran, Iblis is explicitly named as the one who refused to bow. He proclaimed, "I am better than he. You created me from fire, while him you created from clay." This defiance angered Allah, who cast Iblis down, condemning him to a state of humiliation. Allah decreed that Iblis would be banished to hell for his refusal. However, Iblis was not content to simply accept his fate. Instead, he challenged Allah. He pleaded, saying, "Grant me respite until the day when all shall be raised from the dead." This challenge is strikingly similar to how Satan is portrayed as questioning God in the Book of Job. By asking for more time, Iblis directly confronts Allah, much like Satan confronts God in Judeo-Christian texts. Allah, in His wisdom, granted Iblis the time he requested, but placed a condition. Iblis could attempt to lead astray the descendants of Adam, except for the most devout and true believers. Iblis was given until the day of judgment to carry out this mission. In essence, Allah allowed Iblis to attempt to corrupt humanity, but with the understanding that only the most righteous would remain unscathed. After being granted this respite, Iblis's reaction was strange. Rather than feeling remorse for his defiance, he blamed Allah for thwarting his plans. He said, "You have thwarted me, and I shall most certainly lie in ambush for them all. Most of them you will find ungrateful." This statement has puzzled many over the centuries. Specifically, the phrase, "You have thwarted me," seems to suggest that Iblis, in that moment, was completely oblivious to the very sin he had just committed. How could Iblis not recognize that it was his own pride and defiance that led to his fall? This confusion has led many scholars to propose that it was at this exact moment that Iblis was fully transformed from a once pure angel into the embodiment of evil. It was in that moment of challenge, of refusing to submit to the will of Allah, that Iblis's heart became consumed with bitterness, pride, and hatred. According to Islamic belief, it is during this event that the pure angel Iblis is transformed into the devil, driven by a deep sense of betrayal and a burning desire to prove Allah wrong. This intense emotion fuels his singular goal: to lead as many of Adam's descendants astray as possible, ensuring that they will follow him down the path of sin. The story of Iblis offers profound lessons about pride, rebellion, and the consequences of defying divine authority. It serves as a warning that even the most exalted beings can fall when they allow their pride to cloud their judgment. It also highlights the eternal struggle between good and evil, and the choices we, as humans, must make every day. But here's the kicker. The majority of Islamic scholars argue that angels have no free will. They are, essentially, beings devoid of choice, very similar to the Christian belief. If this is true, then it means that Allah played a pivotal role in Iblis's refusal to bow before Adam. Iblis, in this perspective, is not merely a rebellious figure, but a pawn in Allah's greater plan, with every move meticulously orchestrated from the beginning to the end of time. It was Allah who, in essence, caused Iblis's downfall. This is the first narrative. Iblis, or Satan, refused to honor Adam. But there's an alternative version, a story whose legacy wasn't born from religious scripture or apocryphal writings, but rather from its lasting impact on popular culture. You've probably heard of Paradise Lost, the famous 17th century epic poem written by John Milton. Paradise Lost is widely regarded as a literary classic, and rightfully so. However, this work is not the first to tell the story of Satan's fall from grace. In fact, Milton's epic borrows heavily from an older, more obscure text, the Old English epic now referred to as Genesis B. As its name suggests, Genesis B is part of a larger tradition known as Genesis A, and the manuscript of these two works was rediscovered and originally combined. Over time, however, fragments of older copies were found, showing that Genesis A and Genesis B were originally separate works. The oldest known copy of Genesis B dates back to the early 9th century AD, though it had been passed down orally for centuries, possibly since the earliest days of Christianity. This discovery suggests that Genesis B may not have been created purely as a literary work, but rather as a means of conveying religious truths. Dr. Alger Nicktone, a respected authority on Genesis A and Genesis B, has said that it's safe to say that this is theologically, if not dramatically, the most sophisticated and complete realization of this topic. That topic is the fall of Lucifer and his transformation into Satan, the infamous fallen angel. In Genesis B, the story is told from Satan's point of view, providing a deeply personal and nuanced account of his downfall. Now, if Genesis B is good enough for experts like Dr. Nicktone, then we might consider giving it the same level of attention we give to other controversial yet influential works, like the Enochian literature. These texts may not align perfectly with the biblical canon, but they are crucial to understanding the broader lore surrounding figures like Lucifer and Satan. And while Genesis B begins with familiar details, it quickly takes a much more complicated and darker turn. The story begins with the Holy Lord, who, through his divine power, created 10 angelic kindred. In them, he placed his trust. However, one angel among them stood out for his unparalleled strength. God, in his wisdom, allowed this angel to wield power, almost rivaling his own in the heavens. This angel, later known as Lucifer, began to grow increasingly prideful. "Why must I toil?" he asked. "There is no need for me to have a master. I can shape wondrous things with my own hands. I can become a god, just like him. Strong warriors stand beside me. They have chosen me as their lord." Lucifer's pride grew uncontrollable. He saw no reason why he should serve God when he believed he could rule on his own. Eventually, God became aware of Lucifer's boastful claims and his conspiracy to stage a coup in heaven. Furious, God enacted his judgment, casting Lucifer and his followers into hell. The deep chasm that became their new home was one of endless torment. The angels who followed Lucifer fell with him, descending into hell for what felt like an eternity, 3 nights and 3 days. In that darkness, the Lord gave Lucifer a name that would echo throughout history, Satan. And thus, Satan, once a proud archangel, became the fallen enemy of God. In hell, Satan and his followers endured unimaginable suffering. He bitterly raged against the Lord, lamenting their fate. "This narrow place is unlike the glorious home we knew," Satan cried. "We were cast down unfairly." The greatest sorrow, however, is God's creation of mankind. Adam, who was formed from the very dust of the earth, now occupies the throne I once held, and he dwells in joy while we suffer in torment. We are condemned to hell, and I am powerless. Satan continued to complain about his chains, the iron fetters that bound him, his hands, his feet, even his neck. Every effort to move was in vain. His prison in hell was impenetrable, and he was trapped, unable to escape. But amid his suffering, Satan saw an opportunity for revenge. As God had taken away the light from Satan and his fallen angels, Satan vowed to take away the light that God had given to mankind. Satan's bitterness and desire for retribution against humanity burned like an unquenchable fire. The fall of Lucifer, as depicted in Genesis B, represents not only the loss of an angel's glory, but also the inception of an eternal battle against the light of God's creation. This twist in the narrative complicates the traditional biblical understanding and opens the door to deeper philosophical questions about free will, pride, and the nature of evil. He declared, "Consider it, all of you. Consider how you might deceive them. I could rest more easily in these chains afterwards if the light were lost to them. He that fulfills this task for him will receive a ready reward forever after. I shall let him sit with me myself." This is the point where the Genesis B text begins to conflict with traditional Christian beliefs. According to Genesis B, Satan is permanently bound to his person. The serpent in the Garden of Eden, therefore, wasn't Satan himself, but rather a different fallen angel. However, immediately after this monologue, 2 entire sections are missing from the Genesis B manuscript, as if someone intentionally tore them out. As a result, we don't know who exactly this fallen angel was. The narrative picks back up as this dark being flies out of hell to carry out Satan's plan. He successfully deceives Adam and Eve, causing them to eat the forbidden fruit. In doing so, he praises his master, Satan, yearning to return to hell, to be by Satan's side and claim his prize. Whoever this fallen angel was, he had become the surrogate of Satan, a proxy through which the devil, bound by his chains, could freely perform his evil acts on earth. This particular detail is one of the biggest reasons why Genesis B has caused such controversy. It introduces a major twist in interpretation, suggesting that Satan's appearances in the Bible may not actually be him, but rather this unknown fallen angel. This idea that Satan's actions in the Bible could be attributed to a surrogate might seem strange at first, but it's not entirely without precedent. In the Old Testament, it's clear that God also has his own surrogate, the angel of the Lord. I explored this concept in depth in my video on angelology. The book of Revelation also speaks of future events, where Satan is bound by a great chain and locked in the abyss for 1,000 years. Afterward, he is released once again to wreak destruction, only to be locked away once more, this time in the lake of fire. Just as the evil spirits of the Nephilim serve a purpose for God, so too does Satan. This explains why God sometimes loosens Satan's chains, only to bind him up again later, due to the enormous destruction he causes and his unyielding war on heaven. Returning to Genesis B, after Satan's surrogate plants the seeds of sin in mankind, the narrative continues with events from the book of Genesis. It goes on to describe the generations that followed, even detailing the life of the patriarch Enoch and his ascension to heaven. Further generations pass, and eventually, we arrive at the story of the Watchers. The people multiplied throughout Middle-earth, sons and daughters, precious to the Lord, and glory blessed, until the sons of God began to seek out wives among the kindred. The Lord wished to set his punishment on the angels who struck the sinful with death. The kindred of giants, unbeloved by God, the Lord would kill them all in days to come. While Genesis B is obscure, and its significance in the world of fallen angel demonology is profound, it's an important text. The narrative includes the fall of Lucifer and the Watchers in a defined timeline. It mentions the giants and the Nephilim and ties their sins to the flood. The text integrates the Enochian lore, but its true focus is elsewhere, and it is deeply provocative. We could say that Genesis B, along with the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, Jubilees, and the life of Adam and Eve, form a distinct category of religious texts. These texts walk a very different path. They challenge the dogma we have been told is true and right. They spread knowledge that was deemed forbidden, and for that, they faced great punishment. Yet, some of these texts survived, despite the efforts of religious authorities to erase them. Unfortunately, others, just like them, were made extinct. What and how much was lost remains a mystery that only God knows. But we can be thankful that these texts survived. Without them, I wouldn't be able to offer you congratulations. By watching this video in its entirety, I hereby grant you the title of Amateur Fallen Angel Demonologist. And if that wasn't a thing before, it sure is now. You, brave soul, have ventured into some of the most obscure tales and traditions in Abrahamic religion. Let's keep them alive and continue digging for more. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this investigation into fallen angel lore, I encourage you to complete the Biblical Trinity by checking out my obsessive deep dives into angelology and demonology. Or, if you're looking for something a bit more spicy in the occult, check out my video, Treasure Hunting with Demons. A special thank you to my patrons. Your support not only funds these videos, but motivates me to take on challenging rabbit holes like this one. If you'd like to join in, I've got links in the description to pledge monthly or make a one-time donation. 100% of the funds go directly back into these videos. That's my promise to you. I'm Mr. Mythos. Never stop seeking. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. This exploration into the world of fallen angels challenges us to look beyond the conventional teachings we've received and question the hidden aspects of spiritual warfare. The idea of Satan using a surrogate, a fallen angel bound by chains, is an unsettling one. Yet, it reveals a deeper truth. Evil, though bound by certain laws, still manages to influence the world through agents who act in its name. Much like Satan's surrogate, we too can be agents of influence, whether for good or evil. Our choices, however small they may seem, have a ripple effect on the world around us. The key takeaway? We must be vigilant in our actions and decisions, ensuring that we are not unknowingly advancing a darker agenda. Instead, we should strive to be aligned with divine truth, knowing that our purpose is to serve higher principles, even in the face of opposition. By seeking out forbidden knowledge with humility and wisdom, we can better understand the spiritual realm. But, as the fallen angels show, there are consequences to crossing certain lines. Let us tread carefully, seeking enlightenment without falling into the trap of pride, and always seeking to illuminate the darkness with truth and light.
Do you love meaningful Bible stories? Top 7 Bible Stories channel will bring you inspiration and peace every day. Don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments section. Your sharing is the motivation for us to bring more stories. Top 7 Bible Stories. Good stories, beautiful meanings.